So just before we hear what Joe Walters has to tell us about the Roswell incident, let's have a look at General Nathan Twining. So I'm here with Adam, and we're just going to give you a little bit of a brief background summary about who this gentleman was and what he had to tell his son. Told you by Joe. So Adam, let's hear a little bit about what his job was, what his role was, what he did.
He was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 1957 to around 1960.
Okay.
Personally appointed by President Eisenhower. He was the first US Air Force official to ever be appointed as Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is interesting in itself. And
quite a landmark position.
Yes, quite a landmark position. And he was headed up a project named Project Sign. And Project Sign was the official US government project looking into the UFO question and whether or not these aircraft were real.
What happened to that? Or with
well, Project Sign, up until the point they found out things were real and that these UFOs were not part of the US fleet or any of the enemy fleet, it was disbanded. It may have ran a couple of years, but then they removed all the high-flying officials from the project and replaced it with something named Project Grudge, which, if you look into Project Grudge, it's pretty obvious that it was just a whitewash. It was to cover up anything that Project Sign had found out and to remove any connection between the US Air Force High Command and the Project Sign.
It's interesting, isn't it, because we know that General Twining also said that there had never been any wreckage recovered. And of course now we know that is absolutely not true. And I think it's interesting too, because a lot seemed to happen in the States in 1947. I mean, we've got the Twining memo, which we'll come on to in a second, which was written, I think, September 1947, so 3 months after the incident. And then we've got things like the CIA being formed, the NSA, the Air Force and the Army changing, so they became two separate elements. Or factions, and I'm sure there was something else that occurred then. But anyway, I wonder if there's any more that we can say about General Nathan Twining and his role in this.
Just that he was very interested in it, found out that it was real, and then was made to be quiet about it. And kept quiet about it, it seems, until Joe was told by his son that it did happen.
And here we've got the memo here for viewers to look at. And people can have a look at that online. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because it said that these objects were real, not visionary, and were certainly not fictitious. He cited things like the manoeuvrability of them and the way they were able to, I think, just zip in and out of areas. On July 7th, we see General Nathan Twining having to cancel an appointment that he had with a Boeing executive, and later, in a letter written to him just a couple of weeks later, he said that suddenly something very important had developed. And then he had an unexpected trip to Albuquerque and Kirtland Air Force Base, and then we know it went on to Wrights-Patterson and all that kind of thing. So we know that from the 7th to the 11th of July, he had made an unscheduled stopover in these places. And so we know that something unreported to the public in general definitely went on. And what's quite interesting is also on the day, on July 7th, when General Nathan Twining went over on this unexpected journey, Major Jesse Marcel was being shown around by Matt Brazel the whole debris field, which was about 3/4 of a mile long by 200 or 300 feet with a nice 500-foot gouge in it, and was also talking about this second crash site, which bodies were found. So all interesting stuff. Just a little bit of background. We're not here to be experts on it, but just to give you a little bit of backdrop. And for all of General Nathan Twining's life, he had told his son, also Nathan Twining, that there was nothing to be known except that it was a weather balloon and that he should just accept that. But now we know different. Over to Joe. In introducing Joe Walters, I'd like to say hello and welcome to the first MASH interview since the recalibration and since our documentary. So we're here in sunny Bournemouth with Jo at her invitation, and we're going to talk about Roswell. But before we do, in introducing Jo Walters, I know from previous information provided by Jo herself that she is clearly what I'd call a sensitive, with an ability to search or to reach, let's say, levels of, I don't know whether transcendental meditation would be the right phrase, but we'll use that one. But she certainly has some ability, and she might say she hasn't, but I believe she has. So there's a bit of paranormal activity around your life as well, Jo, I know that. But before we get into that, perhaps we could introduce you and hear a little bit about you and some of those instances, and then we'll get on to what we've got to say about Roswell. So please welcome Jo Walters.
Oh.
Jo,
Well, hello.
thank you for contacting MASH in the first place.
Well, I contacted MASH because there was an article in the Sunday Mirror some weeks ago.
Yes, there was, beginning of June.
And it reminded me, well, not that I can ever forget it, the little bit of UFO experience that I have had that I thought might interest them. And then it occurred to me that as I probably won't be living much longer, having sat on this and myself all these years not telling anybody about it, it might be a good idea if I did. So that's how I got into contact with you.
Yes, and I believe your message on the Arts Machine said something along the lines of, I think I may have a little bit of information that not many people know
Yes.
about Roswell. And I thought, wow, this is absolutely fantastic, because here we've got a lovely British lady here who had occasion to meet up, in fact, with General Nathan Twining's son, Nathan Twining Jr., and we'll hear about that in a moment. But I want to hear a little bit more about Jo's background, and let's hear some of your beginnings and your interest in this field. How did you become interested?
Well, that's too much of a long story, really. I can't say much about that. I was born and brought up as an atheist, but various experiences made me have to rethink that.
Yeah.
And even then it took me some years to let that go. I think the upbringing everybody has is terribly powerful.
Yes, it is.
Irrationally powerful. It's very hard to give up on what you've been expected to believe, but I did eventually. I've had a near-death experience, an NDE, which I think ought to be called the DDE, because it's definitely death experience. But that's me. And it was so wonderful. I mean, it was a blissful consciousness beyond anything you know in this life. And I've had one or two of those. When you say that I have this, but the thing is I can't control it at all. Most of my life is very mundane, and I'm about as psychic as an inebriated ant for most of the time. So I can't really say I'm far into this sort of thing.
Yes,
but it's far in enough to be absolutely fascinated and thrilled and delighted, and feel very privileged, really, because if I'd been stuck with the atheism, I wouldn't be as happy now as I am.
yes, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I think this is really exciting, and I think people are interested to hear the points, vignettes of life that have spurred people on to their points of awareness and consciousness growth, that kind of thing. And I know that you were talking whilst we were off camera a little bit about your time, because you were in America previously and you were describing an event at Clearwater, Florida.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that again?
Oh, that was just, I would love to know whether anyone else has seen something of a UFO that resembled this one, because I was 8 stories up in my flat, so I had a huge amount of sky, and the buildings were quite down far below me, and there was a canal coming in, and then more buildings, and I looked down on, and I was over there, just walking past the window, and I saw this strange white shape coming up from the bungalows down below, and it was only a few days after the July fireworks, so I thought it for a moment, oh, it's boys with fireworks left over, this must be something to do with them. And what a funny thing, it's not shining. It was a white shape that came up, and it looked like a bent ice cream cone, a very large bent ice cream cone. It's the only way I can describe it, as if it was cut out in flat cardboard, painted a dull off-white, no light.
Like a 2D shape.
No 3D, absolutely flat, and it seemed to move almost as if it was being taken up by something else. It didn't seem like it was driven by an engine, but of course it must have been. And it came up in an arc until it was right high in the sky and I could look straight at it. Then it turned into a very bright light, And I looked at that, and I'm longing to tell someone. I said, could I fetch someone? If I do, it'll be gone. And then it just started going away into the distance, and very quickly. And that was the end of that one.
And how did you feel when you saw that? Was there any interaction, any emotional?
No, it wasn't. I didn't feel it was for me.
No.
And that what I expected was that other people must have seen it. My first thought was a comforting thought. Well, I can't be the only one that's seen this. After all these windows up here, there's people above me. Somebody must be looking out of the window in this building.
Yeah.
Never mind anywhere else.
Yeah.
But there was nothing. I tried no news of it in any source at all. Nobody seemed to have seen it. Nothing in the press or on the
Interesting.
news. And yet it was so big, really.
Joe, you provided me with some written details about your early life, which were very interesting, and thank you very much for doing that. And it really gave me a different feel about you from our first meeting, because I thought, my goodness, as I said before, there's quite a lot about you that you don't recognise as being particularly special, or I don't know whether gift is the right word, but anyway, it has an ability, because you were saying in the material that from a young age you were able to, I don't know whether dissociate is the right word, but get into these other states of extreme daydream.
Yes, which I didn't sort of take a lot of notice of at the time to sort of ask myself what was going on, but I just did find I was a coward, terrible little coward, and therefore every playtime I tried to hide, mostly in the lavatories, but if it was a nice day I preferred to be outside. And there was a woodshed at the bottom of the garden of this particular school, and it was all dank and horrid behind there, all fungoid and dripping and messy, and the children didn't go behind there. So I discovered this, and I found an old bench round there, and I used to go and sit on that to get out of everybody's way. And I did find that sometimes I never heard the bell at the end, and I'd have to come out of a sort of state I was in and wonder what time it was, and go into the class and get to telling off. And then I also noticed that I used to feel happier when I came out, that there was a sort of serenity that wasn't me, because I was a far from serene child. And I didn't think anything more about it really, because I didn't have any memories of what happened. But then much later on, very much later on when I was, not all that much, I'm sorry I'm muddling this, I was very glad I had that experience, because I was reminded of it when my half-sister, who'd become a nun, realised that my parents hadn't baptised me, and she came charging towards me out of a little side room in her convent, saying, "You haven't been baptised, you'll burn in hell forever if you don't persuade Mother to baptise you." And so I had to stick with this. And I had a terror of fire, absolute terror of any sort of physical pain and of fire. And Mother came in, so I had to go then. I couldn't have any more conversation with my sister. And we went to have tea with a relation. And normally there were lovely cakes there, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And God, I was trying to get these cakes down, and I couldn't. It was awful, because I felt so terrified and awful. And I managed to swallow some, and then I said, could I go in the garden from here? Just felt I wanted to be outside. And when I got out there and I sort of held this idea of burning in hell forever, what that would mean. And then I got this, I don't know how to describe it, it was like an indignant voice, but it wasn't really a voice, it was an essence, telling me, how could I be so stupid, how could I be so insulting to God? And there was this sense of, I am God, I am love, I am all love. Therefore, how could, it's as if God himself was insulted by the idea of burning in hell. It was a tender voice, but it was indignant, and it wasn't, as I say, I call it a voice, but it wasn't a voice. It was.
Did that encourage you?
Very direct in taking in, not a voice really, but it transformed me. It just absolutely, from the abyss of terror to that most wonderful, serene bliss. And I immediately linked with being behind the woodshed. For a moment it was as if I was sitting behind the woodshed, and I knew there was a connection.
Yes.
And yes, no fear of hell after that.
There was another incident that you mentioned in your writings, and we'll just mention this last one again because it's sort of indicative of the depths of you, Joe. And it's where you were moving yourself from a little bedsit to another one late at night, carrying some really heavy bags
cases,
all by yourself.
All my worldly possessions
In
into
the
heavy
dark.
suitcases and a handbag.
In the dark. And tell us what happened.
Well, I was walking along a place called St Mary's Terrace, I think it is, in Kensington, and that's where I was going. It was quite a long walk along before I got to my new place, and there was no cars, nobody about, nothing. And those houses on my right-hand side, there were shabby gardens. I don't think it was all that long. It must have been some time after the war, but they don't seem to have done any reconstruction much there. Gardens were in a mess, and people with money didn't live there. There were cellars in those houses. And when I saw this group of youths suddenly strung across my path from lamppost to wall, I remember that I had read that a few weeks earlier a woman had been found raped and murdered in one of the cellars in St Mary's Terrace. And my first thought, what a fool I am to be coming along here at midnight. Why didn't I remember that? Why didn't I think of that? But anyway, there they were, strung out, jeering and looking...
So you'd have been about what age, Joe?
Evil. In my 20s. I had to have a guess at 24, but that probably isn't right. No, a bit older. 26 at least, 26 I think. And anyway, my first thought was colossal fear. There they were, and I'm an awful coward anyway. And I just prayed, oh God, take me over now, take me over now. With tremendous intensity. And nothing happened, I just had to go on walking along. So I thought, I can't turn and run, I can't run with suitcases anyway. So I went steadily towards them, and suddenly I just seemed not to be there. As though I was observing from somewhere else. And yet, what I was feeling, I call it the I that is not I when I write about it. I'm completely confident, seemed to be tall, I seemed to be looking down slightly on these boys. The suitcases didn't notice their weight at all. I just felt strong, confident, invincible being and walking to these boys, and I felt sorry for them. I thought, poor lads, they must be very unhappy to be behaving like this. And I just knew perfectly all right. I just walked through them as if they were ghosts almost, and it didn't matter at all.
And didn't you see yourself change?
Yes, I felt a crinkly sensation over my face. And I had this sensation of being bigger and taller. And as I got to them, their faces became really frightened. They looked very frightened of me, and they just parted, and I walked through. And after I'd gone some way down, I felt myself coming back into myself and being me again. And one of these lads shouted after me, carry your case, miss. And so I turned to them and said, no, thank you, I've managed it quite well. So I never, of course, knew their end of it, but I'm sure something upset them. And I just had this wonderful experience of...
So terror turned...
The idea is not I wish I could be that person all the time.
That's wonderful. So now we'll skit on. Thanks for sharing those things, Joe, because I just thought it's important, because I don't think that you see those things in you as being important.
For some reason...
They're amazing.
For some reason, I always thought when I was young that I was here for a purpose, and it was a big purpose, a good purpose, an important purpose. I've done nothing with my life. I'm more of a failure than average. It hasn't happened. But that sense, I've always had this moment where I'm not at all psychic, but if my life's in danger, then remarkable things happen. That was just one of them, the 3 or 4. As if I was meant to be preserved for something. But here I am at this advanced age and nothing, so I don't know, maybe it's the next life, I don't know.
Or maybe it's this interview.
You never know.
So Joe,
I would like to contribute any way I could to having more of the human race realise it was immortal. And I would also suggest that anyone in their childhood or teens who just want to know what to do about religion and what to do about God, if they would just suspend disbelief for a few months and pray every night, oh God, if there is a God, help me to find you. Because that's what I did. That's what I did when I was about 13 or 14. I did that for a time. Because I was trying, I was a communist, and young communist, and yet I had all these doubts. And that, it worked for me. Things happened after that, things got going. It had, to some extent, they had before, of course, but it did really help. I would think anybody who prayed that prayer would be answered. It would be answered.
Well, we know there's been a lot of research work done on the power of prayer.
Yes.
Specifically,
Yes.
Larry Dossey springs to mind, and Oprah Winfrey's program's had quite a few people
Oh,
on,
really?
and they've done a lot of research from people praying over bacteria, just for the wellness of the bacteria, not a specific
Oh,
prayer.
I've heard of that.
And the bacteria have developed.
What do they do? Yes.
It develops as it would in its normal way, but better, bigger, more of it. And it's the same for any prayer. There is scientific evidence to prove that prayer works.
Yes, I know
And the
that there
positive
have been
thing.
various things that show it. And particularly, I was so out of the habit of praying. After that, my life dropped a lot because I got terribly involved, as young women do, with relationships, and they all went wrong. And I left all this very much to decide, and nothing came through. And partly it's all my own fault, and I just let it all go.
Yeah, life changes, doesn't it?
But it was very unfortunate experience, and it was a long time before anything else happened, really.
Well, let's at this point fast forward till you're
Yes.
thinking about retiring now,
Yes.
and you're off to America with a couple of friends to think about perhaps retiring in America.
Yes, we are.
Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, I had two good women friends, and we had, I don't really want to talk about science of mind, that's only a distraction, but we were all in a sort of philosophy come religion, which is quite strong in parts of America, called science of mind. And here, I've just got this little bit where I happen to live, in Bournemouth. And one of my friends was the minister in that religion, the Reverend Rita Parr, and one of our friends. And she already had American nationality because she'd married an American. I had to struggle to get it, but I got it. Because in the end, I got tired of waiting for Rita and went out there on my own, but that's another story.
So can we look at...
When we went out together, we'd been told by a friend out there in Science of Mind that Nathan Twining had this large expanse of land, and they were hoping to have a community of science-minded people living, making life on this community. Would we like to do it? So we liked the sound of that, and Nathan Twining very generously offered us a weekend in his place where he could take us out to see the land and talk it all through.
Do you know what year, roughly,
And
this would be, Joe?
This was round about, I said 15 years ago, didn't I? About 1940, no, 20, where am I? Let's see.
2013 now.
1997, 1998.
Okay.
I really can't. I don't
Yeah,
think
somewhere
about that.
late 90s.
I have to think
Okay.
about that. I remember telling you I've worked out it was 15 years ago from now, and that must be around about
Yes.
right, I think.
Yeah.
And I wasn't. I knew. I didn't. I'm not sure that I even knew it was Roswell we were actually going to. The actual little village or town or whatever was out there may have another name. But I know the piece of land that we were shown, the garden, if we had it, the end of the land that we would have bought, did adjoin the Area 51, the high security area. So we were close to that. And of course, when we got out there, I found that Nathan Twining was deeply interested in the USO subject. And he just said something, I suppose, while we were eating, that made me realise he was. And then I realised that we were at Roswell, and he was sort of part of it. And when he found I was interested, he was quite excited and willing to talk. Both my friends were not a bit interested, which rather annoyed me. But anyway, so he and I were only able to talk when we were alone. We only had one real good conversation. And then it was when he told me this amazing fact, that he was the son of General Twining, which I hadn't realised, and that General Twining was one of the three top brass who were instrumental in playing down the Roswell story and putting it all back. And he said that 6 weeks, he said, I never really believed it. Nathan said, I always felt it really was something.
What do you mean, the balloon story?
Yes, he didn't want to believe that. And he thought, he knew something had happened. There was too much going on, too many people talking. Something must have happened. It wasn't just that.
And did his dad carry on with that story?
Yes, absolutely. No, forget about it, my son. It's all nonsense. Forget about it. Nothing happened. And then 6 weeks before he died, when he knew he was dying, he sent to his son, sent to Nathan, and said, I don't want to die with this on my conscience, because apart from one thing, I've always been absolutely straight with you, and I know you've been straight with me, and words to that effect. But he said the Roswell event was a real event, and one of the beings, I think he said there were 3 beings, he might have said 5, but I think he said 3, and he said one of them was still alive, and we took him to the high security place, I forget its name, you know, the Area 51 place. You know its name, I've forgotten it. We took him to the security place, and he's lived in there for 15 years. And I used to visit him quite often and talk with him, and I came to admire and respect him very much. I regarded him as a friend. Now, I think I did ask how they communicated, and I think telepathy was mentioned, but I'm not certain. I didn't ask enough questions, I didn't go into it enough. I thought we could talk again. And so... Did
he get to describe him, this being?
No. There's so much I wanted to know and I didn't ask and didn't think to. This wasn't a long conversation even. My friends came in and it all had to go out and go to dinner and it was all over. And there wasn't really another one. There's only one very brief moment when we were standing beside his front window and a woman passed and we'd been talking apparently about implants because he said that she has an implant. This woman went past. But that was all I had. The next, a few hours later we were leaving and we had to go out and see the land and all that. We just had this really truncated conversation. It wasn't long enough, nearly long enough.
And did you keep in touch with Nathan Twining Jr.?
So stupid. I'd be so different now. I was a lot younger then. I'd be so different now. I didn't even write him a thank you letter. I was grateful. I left that to Rita. But I would have given him an excuse to stay in touch with him. He was quite keen, I think, to stay in touch with me. He gave me some sort of CD with music he'd written, wanting me to let him know what I thought of it. And I never even played it when I got back. And I lost it.
So, Joe, can I ask you about how he felt about telling you? Because when you initially contacted me, one of the things that you said, you were after you'd written to me, and I think that took a lot of doing. So that was great. Well, the fact that you're letting something go that you haven't done.
Well, my only fear was that the Twining, General Twining, in the conversation, he did say, "Please, this is very confidential. Don't want this going further." And he looked a little almost frightened for a moment, and I really took that seriously. I thought, well, he didn't tell me they'd been threatened at the beginning, but I'd read earlier somewhere else that the 3 top brass had been threatened with disgrace and general trouble if they said anything.
Yeah.
And of course, I'd read that Captain somebody or other who'd taken a piece of the thing.
Jesse Marcel.
Marcel home. He had his career messed up with it because he was forced to recant, as it were. And I'd like to know what happened with the piece of material. I think the top people got that because it disappeared.
Yeah.
And so there was nothing. But I felt there was a sense that he could still be his time. And even now I've tried to find out, make sure that nothing could happen there that could upset anybody.
Yes,
I don't mind upsetting America, but I don't want to upset Twining.
Well, I did, as I told you, Joe, reported to you, I made 1 or 2 inquiries myself to find out if Nathan was still alive. I don't know what age group he'd be, but I imagine he's probably around your age.
Yes, I would think
something
so,
like that.
Yes.
And around the sort of mid-80s area.
Yes.
And I was told that he was sort of not publicly accessible, or perhaps accessible at all. And from what I understood from that was that he, maybe to do with age or health or both, you know, that was the
Probably
situation.
nursing home or something, yes.
Maybe, but certainly not contactable
Yes.
or accessible. So
Yes. Yes. I don't
just
think-
to allay your fears,
Yes.
because I think that's
Yes.
also
I
something
don't
again.
think you could blame him for coming out with it after 15 years.
No,
This is all I was really concerned about.
I think not. No, and that's absolutely correct. And we'd never want, you know, the whole, you know, our whole ethos is about, you know, disclosure with exposure. We're bringing material out and we're putting it out there for public, you know, perusal,
And of course
dissemination.
he may have told quite a few other people, or other
Yes.
people may have done. I may be like the monk who invented the bicycle in 1920. You know, it's all out there anyway. That's one of the reasons I contacted you. I thought you'd know.
Well, I have done some research myself, not as much as I should have perhaps, but I see nothing at all that says that General Nathan Twining, the father, at all believed that there was, or not believed, stated that there was a crash. In fact, he stated there was no wreckage found. And although there is the Twining memo, which we know about, which said that these objects were not fictitious, not, you know, sort of some fantasy, they were real, which was written in 1947,
Yes, exactly.
in September, 3 months after the Roswell crash. He would have been well briefed and have met his now to be 15 years on buddy, the ET, which we don't have any more information about. But so clearly he knew quite a lot that was going on and was very much integral to it. And the fact that his son, Nathan Jr., was never told anything right up until 6 weeks before his bed makes this actually a deathbed
Yes,
confession.
I think so, because obviously,
Yes.
as it happened, it can't
Yes.
be anything different.
Yeah.
And but there must be other people who've worked in that high security place who
Of
know all
course.
this. And,
Of
and
course.
my goodness, they must have it.
Well, the thing about this, Joe, is that you are not bound up by the Official Secrets Act.
No.
Neither am I.
Yes, of course they all would be. wouldn't
And
Very
they would
commercial.
be.
Yes.
And
Conversion, yes.
and Nathan Jr. wouldn't be, perhaps, I don't know what his role was in life, I haven't just looked at that, but the fact that he would be concerned 15 years or so ago, you know, would mean that he felt that there was some possibility of endangerment
He did seem to
one
think
way
so.
or another. So,
He had a rank, and he wasn't Mr. Twining. He was
No.
something. What was he, Nathan?
do you know what? I
You
really
don't
should
know
have
either.
had a look, but I didn't.
He was something. Therefore, he did have some military or Air Force connections of
Yeah.
some kind.
Yeah.
Therefore, he might have been in the Official Secrets Act. That could be what was bothering him.
Yeah.
Yes. that could
Well, I
be
think
it.
this is amazing, and I would just like to say a very big thank you to Joe Walters for giving us your time, and hopefully we'll go and have a nice coffee now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Well,
to Adam
very
for
much.
being behind the camera, and lovely day down here in Bournemouth in a sunny July weekend. So thank you very much, and this is Amash hearing for the first time about General Nathan Twining and his deathbed confession to his son, Nathan Twining Jr. You heard it here first.
And thank you.
Thanks, John.